the desktop screen, there is a chat box section. If you don't mind, let's do a quick sound and video check as we get everyone out of the waiting room and here into the session. Quick sound and video check. You guys see and hear me out there? Go ahead and chat it there in the chat box. Awesome. All good. Awesome. Okay, so as we get going, I'd like to just, as I'm going to be introducing myself to you, talking a little bit about me, I want to hear a little bit about you. Maybe you could just chat in where you're tuning in from. Tuning in from what city, time zone, state, whatever, however you want to say where you're tuning in from. We'll give you a shout out. We get everyone out of the waiting room and here into the session. We've got Arizona, Georgia, Massachusetts, Ohio, California, Texas, Chile, Buffalo, let's see, Los Angeles, Wisconsin, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, Wichita. I don't know if I get very many people from Wichita, so welcome, Wichita. Florida, Memphis, Illinois, Oklahoma City, Toronto, Miami, New Jersey, Pakistan, Mumbai, Philippines, San Diego. Awesome. So we're getting people tuning in from really all over the United States and literally all over the world. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon. I'm excited to talk about some of the good content I have some practice questions we're going to go through together. So I want to make this not just a broad 30,000 foot view of the NPTE. I also want to talk about actual content and practice questions today. As you know, I do run a live online review. We're starting that up this Saturday, so March 3rd is coming up with our first session of our April class. So if you haven't heard yet, we are starting the live sessions for our April class. So hurry and sign up there. You can find the enroll, click enroll, or check out the courses on ptfinalexam.com, or you can always email me and I can help you out. Okay, let's see. Heather, can't hear anything. Sound and video check, guys. Let me get a thumbs up from a few of you, see if the internet gremlins are causing us grief or not. All good on Amy's end. Good. And as always, when at the internet, there are always the internet gremlins. Seems inevitable that there's always something going on somewhere between my computer, the servers, and back to your computer again. But in any case, we will do our best with what is given to us. And so if you do have troubles with the connection, try logging in, logging back, logging out, then logging back in, and see if that helps. Always make sure to disconnect or decrease any of the other internet using, like OneDrive is classic. If you're using a PC, OneDrive just eats up a lot of bandwidth, so watch out for that. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about our plan today. This is what we're going to do. We're going to be talking about what's actually on the NPTE. Most of you who are attending here are planning on taking either the April or the July exam. There are some of you who are probably planning on taking it a little bit farther down the road, maybe a couple of first or second year students just trying to get a taste of what the exam is all about. But a lot of you who are here are pretty serious about getting going for the NPTE, which is coming up faster than we would like in April and July. As you know, it's fixed date testing, so it happens 4 times each year: January, April, July, and October. So we're going to be talking about what is actually on the NPTE, some of the changes that came to 2018, some of the categories that you need to study, really give you a broad outline of what to study. And then we'll be talking about how to study, some of the strategies that might help you get more information to stick inside your head. And then, like I said, we've got practice questions coming, So watch for those. By the way, my name is Will Crane. I'm a physical therapist. I practice in the state of Idaho, great state of Idaho. Any of you who have ever been to Idaho, give me a fist pump. Not very many people come to Idaho unless you're going on your way to Yellowstone National Park. I practice in a rural hospital setting, and I get to see a wide variety of patients, from inpatient to outpatient, neuro, ortho, geriatric, pediatric, orthopedics, sports. I get to see quite a bit of things, quite a range of the physical therapy practice. I'm also an emergency medical responder. I drive the ambulances in what spare time I do have, and I really enjoy teaching about physical therapy. I started this PT final exam in 2012, so I've been going for about 6 years now. And I started because I felt a little lost. I wish someone had just told me what the exam was going to be about. So I'm trying to instill some of the wisdom that I've garnered now that I'm on the other side, passing it on to you guys and hopefully making a difference in your studies. All right, so let's see. Let's talk about some of the changes that happened in 2018. So in 2018, which where we are now, we've just passed the January exam and heading into the April exam. There were some changes that occurred to the NPTE. Now, there is a lot of myth that follows the changes. It's a little bit nebulous. So I'm going to spell it out for you. I've been to the FSBPT headquarters. I've talked to the FSBPT folks. They put on a seminar every October. I've been on 2 separate occasions talking to the FSBPT about what is specifically happening to the NPTE for 2018. And so the biggest thing, and a lot of people will cite this as the biggest change for 2018, was that they separated the lymphatic system out and away from the rest of the cardiovascular and pulmonary system. Before, they used to lump it all together, cardiovascular, pulmonary, and lymphatic systems, but now they've switched and pulled lymphatic out and put it in its own separate section. Now, the key there is that before, in 2017 and before, they were asking lymphatic system questions. However, now they are simply guaranteeing the number of questions. And so it's really not as big of a deal as some would say, but there will be somewhere between 3 and 8 questions on the lymphatic system specifically. Now, you could argue that most of those, I mean, there will be as few as 3 questions on the lymphatic system, so obviously not in a lot of detail. You could argue that that lymphedema is probably your highest priority item there in the lymphatic system, but there would certainly be some post-cancer, some cancer-related lymphedema that would be worth and studying there as well. And at the end here, I've also got a special bonus regarding the lymphatic system section for those of you who stick around to the end. Got a special freebie for you. For those of you who are attending today, it'll be awesome. Okay, so then they also added a little bit of gastrointestinal system examination, 0 to 2 questions. This is just related to your examination of the gastrointestinal system, as you can imagine. So this would be looking at hernias, McBurney's point, appendicitis, liver issues. I mean, all of the kind of the broad form gastrointestinal system, just making sure you can rule in or rule out gastrointestinal system distress as a cause or a source of pain or visceral pain, referred pain. So yeah, they added, and really just 0 to 2 questions. Again, not a real major change there. They reduced the musculoskeletal system by close to 10%. And that was just to accommodate the addition of questions here in the gastrointestinal and the lymphatic system. They've also increased the system interactions. This is, again, just looking at how systems can interact with one another. A great example is like the neuromuscular system. I guess what I want to say, the example I was going to bring is that with multiple sclerosis, patients have a very poor tolerance of heat, or a heat intolerance. And so the neurological problem of multiple sclerosis can translate into a decrease in tolerance of activity. They have a heat intolerance, so as they get warmer, they tend to tolerate less and less exercise. So you can see how that interacts with another system, with the musculoskeletal system. Let's say you're trying to have them walk on a treadmill. That multiple sclerosis, the heat intolerance, can alter their tolerance of activity. And then there's just some other minor reallocations. The PTA, there were really no other major changes other than what we've already talked about. And those of you who have purchased the PEAT exams before, they have revised the PEATs. They were pretty emphatic at the FSBPT that they did not entirely change the PEATs. They are just revised to reflect the new content outline. And so this is the content outline for 2018. If you guys don't, let's see, I need someone to volunteer in the chat box. I need someone to go look up the FSBPT 2018 content outline. FSBPT 2018 content outline, and paste the link there in the chat box. So if someone would just volunteer themselves to go over and Google search FSBPT 2018 content outline, that'll be a great resource for you as you prepare for the exam. Jason, you asked a great question. Is the lecture recorded today? Yes, it will be recorded. I'll be posting it on the blog, so you can go and check that out. Natalia, thank you so much for posting that. It's a free resource from the FSBPT, and it shows this document plus about 16 other pages worth of description for the NPTE. It's something that I feel like every student should have some have a grasp of what is actually on the NPTE. This is what they publish. It's free content and helps you see what the number of questions are in each section on the NPTE. Okay, so that's critical. Again, really hope that you guys spend some time looking at it. I also posted some of the links here that I want you to look at. Maybe if Natalia or someone else wants to self-volunteer, I'd also like you to look up the textbook survey. So a lot of people ask me, where does the content for the NPTE come from? And they're very clear that the questions written on the NPTE must have textbook resources listed for each of the questions, for the and incorrect responses. And so your question would be, well, what textbooks do they bring the questions out of? And you can find this is called the textbook survey on FSBPT. And it's written here, fsbpt.com/educator/textbooksurveydata.aspx. If someone wants to type that in or do a quick Google search on that, that would be a good resource for you as well. The content outlines, obviously, Natalia, you've already got that. And then the other thing I want to point out is the practice analysis. So FSBPT, it is the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy. So some people consider it a bureaucratic office that is totally unrelated and disconnected with physical therapy. But really, it's just the state boards of physical therapy that come together and determine physical therapy. What is the definition of physical therapy in the United States today? And so one of those things they do is they do what's called a practice analysis. And this is just demonstrating what types of practice are being performed by physical therapists today on a regular basis, and then basing the NPTE off of what physical therapists actually do US of A. So thank you so much, Natalia. I appreciate you self-selecting as my helper today. When we get into our class sessions, when we start our paid course, which starts on Saturday, I have a designated chat box specialist who helps me out and makes sure all the links are there. Today it's just going to be you and me, and we're talking about all these things, and I really appreciate you guys stepping up. And if there are any useful links that you guys have along the way, please feel free to share those in the chat box. Awesome. So there you go. Textbook survey, content outlines, practice analysis. It's how they create the NPTE. This is the content that determines what is actually on the NPTE. Okie doke. So with that, the other small change that came in 2018 shouldn't be a real big deal, but they did increase the standard, meaning the number of questions that you have to answer correctly in order to pass the exam was increased for 2018. And that translates realistically to about 4 additional questions. Take that for what it's worth. I mean, as students, obviously you're trying to hit the 100%. You're answering as many questions correctly as you possibly can. But just as a note, the standard did increase for 2018, and that should just be an added feather in your cap saying, okay, yeah, I need to take this seriously. It's not that it wasn't serious before, but it's 4 questions more serious now. The PTA, they changed by about 3 questions. And really, this is just the way physical therapy practice is going in the United States, meaning that more and more we are called upon to have direct access with our patients, to work in home health settings where we are, in a real sense, on the front line of dealing with patients and any of the issues that come up as we're treating them. And so we have to be much more qualified as time passes, as compared to, say, 30 or 40 years ago. The practice of PT was very much different than it is now. Many states now allow for direct access, where you can treat a person without a physician script. There's still some states that require, and obviously Medicare is probably the biggest insurance provider, government insurance, that requires a physician to sign off on any physical therapy plan of care. But with private insurers, physical therapists are very often on the front lines, very much the front lines. All right, so this is I like this picture from Monsters, Inc. What is actually on the NPTE? A lot of people get this sort of image in their mind when they think about the National Physical Therapy Exam, like, whew, that's crazy. They also get this picture in their mind as like, oh, it's really, really complicated. There's something new that I haven't looked at before. Or they think like, this is like surgery. I mean, I'm going to have to be, a million miles beyond where I am today in order to pass the exam. Well, the truth is, it's none of those. The National Physical Therapy Exam is what you have been studying, hopefully studying, in your physical therapy schooling up till this point. In order to be CAPTE certified, CAPTE is the governing agency that governs the education of physical therapists in the United States. In order to be CAPTE certified, every program has to meet certain threshold requirements and therefore be able to demonstrate that they're actually teaching their students relevant and important information. So this is just that same content outline that I had before. So let's talk about, I guess, one of the big things I want to point out here, that what's actually on the NPTE is that it's entry-level content. And so this is where, this picture, you don't have to be the world's expert in, say, lymphedema, or the world's expert. You don't have to be an orthopedic certified specialist to pass the exam. You're going to run into material that is considered entry level, what you might encounter within the first 12 months of practice as a physical therapist in the United States. They also want it to reflect current content, and so that's where that textbook survey comes in, that they look at the textbooks that have been published within the last 5 years, and so trying to reflect current practice in the United States. Everyone, a lot of times people ask me, well, what about dry needling? Is dry needling on the exam yet? The answer is no, because most states require some sort of specialty education in order to practice dry needling in the state, and some states ban it entirely. I practice in the state of Idaho, which is one of those states where the practice of dry needling is entirely banned by physical therapists. And so therefore you can see how, although dry needling might be something that could come through the pipeline in the next few years, in the next 5 or 10 years, at this moment it's not on the NPTE because you require specialty certification, and some states ban it or outlaw it entirely. Let's see, what else did I want to say here? Current content. Oh, and back here, this is, it might be a little bit fuzzy for you, but in the content outline, there are some key words that I want to point out. Safe and effective. So when you're answering questions on the NPTE, sometimes it helps to put into perspective that the question is asking what is the safest and most effective way to treat that patient. And that's usually where it comes the distinction between the correct answer and the incorrect answer, is the safety and efficacy of that intervention, or the safety and efficacy of that examination technique. Just think safety and efficacy, and that'll help. Usually that helps with when you get down to 50-50, a lot of students can get it down. You have 4 options on the NP. I'll talk about this in a minute. But usually you can get it down to 50-50 between one option and another option, and go with what is the safest, most effective. Safest and most effective. And that'll help you out in a lot of cases. And a lot of people always ask me, Will, what's the best way if I get it down to 50-50, how do I determine which one it is? And that's back to the content, helping. And I want to talk about the content, about how to study the content, how to get the content internalized, so that you can answer the questions just correctly on the NPTE. All right, so when they develop these questions, and I'm just going to breeze through this very quickly, just to give you an overview of how they create these questions. So the questions are written by physical therapists. Some people, again, think it's some sort of bureaucracy, some people sitting in an office a long ways away that are totally disconnected with the practice of physical therapy. That's not true. The exam is written by currently practicing licensed physical therapists across a variety of practice settings and across the country. So geographic areas and practice settings, they try to represent a very diverse group of physical therapists. So these volunteer item writers, they come to either the FSBPT comes to them, or they have workshops in different regions of the country, or they bring the item writers in and they start writing items and trying to create some sort of entry level physical therapy not practice question, but an exam question. And then that question goes through about 8 different committees over the course of about 2 years. So these 8 different committees revise the question, they make it clear, they try to eliminate wording that's unclear or that's not necessary to answering the question. Each item has to go through a number of subcommittees, all of which are are done by either practicing physical therapists or people who are involved in the psychometric, kind of the statistics part of exam creation. So it goes through quite a process of all that. And then each item becomes what's called a pretest item and is given to you on the NPTE as a pretest or a non-scored item. What they do here is they're analyzing to see if people who pass the exam get the question right and people who don't pass the exam get the question wrong. And so they can roll it out and do live testing and determine the validity of each question that way as well. So again, it takes quite a while for a question to be written and then to finally appear on your exam. And then in kind of a bittersweet moment, it feels bittersweet. You've spent all that time and effort creating these questions for the exam. They are typically used only one time and then discarded forever. And that just goes to show that there are how many questions they have to create in order to provide exams for people across the entire country. So on any given exam day, there are somewhere between 5 and 10 forms of the exam, meaning that if you're sitting right next to your classmate in the Prometric Testing Center, they work hard to make sure that you're taking 2 separate forms of the exam. So you'd have entirely different questions, obviously still covering the same content, but you'll have different questions, again, to eliminate cheating. They want to make sure that you're not just copying answers off of someone sitting next to you. So these questions are grouped into 200 question blocks, and they're given on any given test day. There's somewhere between 5 and 10. Then there are, let's see, do I have it on this slide? I don't have it on this slide. But on your test day, you plan on 250 questions. And remember, 50 of those are pre-test items or not scored. Sad news here is there's no way to distinguish them among the other ones. And so those 50, they will look and feel just like any other questions. There's no way that you can tell which ones are pre-test items and which ones are real items. So, and they do that on purpose because they want you to answer it like your life depended on that question. So just plan on answering every question correctly. Just plan on that. Let's see. The passing score is 600 out of 800. This is approximately 75%. But the reason they do a scale scoring is because they have somewhere between 5 and 10 exam forms at any one time. And what that does is that each exam form has some slight variation. And so therefore the scale scoring allows them to grade, it's not a curve, but put all of the exam forms on an equivalent footing so that your performance on exam form A is predictive of what your performance will be on exam form B, so that no matter which exam form, you would be getting essentially the same score, the same passing bar on each of them. And they use some pretty heavy-duty statistics. It's called item response theory. They have to be accredited and have a number of statistical oversight committees to make sure that the item response theory is being what do you want to say, rolled out in equitable fashion. So a lot of oversight in this. It's not just an arbitrary 75% passes. It's also not a curve, and I'll talk about that. I've got a myths slide coming up. It's not a curve. It's just the bar. It's like the high jump in the Olympics. You set the bar. You have to jump over the bar. The bar doesn't change with person. It doesn't change with time. It's just the bar. The only change comes is about every 5 years when they determine if the bar is high enough. And that's what happened in 2018 is they raised the bar about 4 questions. Now the 600 out of 800 scale score, I've seen it on score reports as low as around 65%, and I've seen it as high as about 75%. Again, I don't want you to spend too much time worrying about, okay, am I getting a 68% or am I getting a 71%? Try to get as many questions as you can correct. Target that 75%. That's a really good target. You're usually pretty safe at the 75% mark. And dive in and target that. And then the other thing is that the test is the same for every single state of the Union in the United States. Remember, this is the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy, meaning that all of the state boards agreed, and it was back in the 80s when they did so. They agreed to all issue the same test. Before the 80s, it was a separate test for different states, but now it is all the same test, the absolute same test by the same body across all of the United States. To practice as a physical therapist, it's the same test. The only difference is that some states require a jurisprudence examination. I believe California, Arizona, Texas. I don't know if you guys have some of the states that require jurisprudence examinations. Go ahead and spit them out there in the chat box. But some states require that you take a jurisprudence exam. Texas, obviously Texas, New Hampshire, Georgia, California. Idaho's, when I took mine, I was getting licensed in the state of Idaho. It was a take-home jurisprudence exam, which I like. I didn't mind having a take-home test. The theory was that you would become familiar with the laws of the state and practice according to the laws that were specific to that state. Some of the states, though, actually make you take a standardized written test in a prometric testing center. So if your state does that, be sure to comply and study some of the laws associated with that state. Typically, it's a fairly low threshold. They want everyone who passes the exam to just blast through this jurisprudence exam, really just to make sure that you practice according to the statutes of your given state. Yeah, so mine was a take-home test. And look, Christopher, you've got one that's it's online at home. Again, don't stress too much about the jurisprudence exam. Some states have them, some states don't. But yeah, that would be the only difference state to state. Otherwise, the exam, the NPTE, is the same across the board. Across the board. Oh, and the other thing is, those of you who are finishing your schooling and are preparing for the NPTE, it doesn't matter where your prometric testing center is. The only thing that matters is where you applied for licensure. And what I mean by that is that, say, like in my example, I was preparing to be licensed in the state of Idaho. I could have taken the test in any prometric testing center across the United States, and I just had to, all I was doing was I made sure that I was applying through the state of Idaho and that my score was then reported to the state of Idaho, so my license could be issued in the state of Idaho. So it doesn't matter where you're physically sitting for the test, as long as your licensing application is in the desired state. This works well if you're planning to move across the country. Say you're in Florida and you want to practice in California. You don't have to fly to California to take the test. You can take the test in Florida. You just have to have all of your credentialing and license application, everything into California. Really, all that happens is your score is reported to California. Awesome. So there you go. There's a little bit about the exam development. These are just, I don't know why I put this slide in here, just more about all the main systems that are on the content outline. The big three, as you guys know, musculoskeletal, neuromuscular, and cardiovascular. Oh, I know why I put this slide. Some people, I get tons of questions. All the time I get questions. Will, where do I figure out, what's the best book for the non-systems domain? Everyone gets a little bit worried about the non-systems domain because it covers things like professional responsibility, safety and protection, modalities, research. It covers devices. It covers quite a variety of topics. And there's no one book just for the non-systems domain. And the other thing I want to point out, the non-systems domain makes up only about 25 questions on the NPTE. So really we're talking, 10 to 12% of the whole exam is non-systems. And so when you're studying, study proportionately, meaning that I wouldn't spend, all my time on non-systems to the neglect of the big three. Rather, I would study proportionally. I'd make sure to hit those big three in a higher proportion or higher amount of time as compared to the non-systems. And just as a note, as a result of all those non-systems questions, I actually created a course on the non-systems, which is part of anyone who purchases the live course or my independent study course, you can get access to a series of lectures I made about the non-systems, which covers all of those topics we talked about, the safety and protection, the professional responsibilities, research, modalities, equipment and devices, all of those things. So if you haven't already, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's just a little pitch for either my live class or the independent class. Both of those include my non-systems lectures, which I think you'd really like. I've had some really good response from those non-system lectures. Basically, your crash course on all the things about the non-systems that you need to know for the test. All right, I think we've talked about most of these. I've had a couple of emails lately about people who are worried about taking the July test because it'll be harder as compared to the January test. It's easier. That is absolutely not true. It is the same test. There is no curve I mean, the theory there is that, okay, so there's more students taking it in July because July is the most popular test date. They have 2 test dates, 2 days back to back that you're randomly assigned to one of those 2 days. But that by having more students in July, that would create a higher threshold, that they only pass, that the theory, the myth is that they only pass 80% of people who take the test. That is not true. They pass everyone who gets above the 600 threshold, and they make that 600 threshold equivalent across all the exam forms and across the exam dates. So it doesn't matter when you take it. There's no, again, the curve, if it was graded on the curve, the theory would be that with the bell curve, that they would only pass the bottom 75 or 80%, or sorry, I'm having that backwards. Let me try again. In the curve, they set, either the median or, I don't know, 1 standard deviation below the median, and they say everyone above here passes and everyone below here fails, and therefore as a proportion it's just not the case. Just don't pay attention to any of that. It's just 600 out of 800 no matter what exam you take. Jomi, January test wasn't easy, trust me. That's right. So it's no easier in January than it will be in July. It's same test all across. Now, I've had some people who say, one exam form that they, people who've taken multiple attempts, they'll say that each exam form feels different. And that is absolutely true, that it's an entirely different set of questions. And as I showed you on that content outline, there is a range, a numeric range of questions. So in theory, you could have an extra 5 questions about this and 5 fewer questions about that. And it changes the feel of the test. You don't have any control of that. Just study everything and pass it all. 800 out of 800. A lot of people are seeking, it's kind of a unicorn score, 800 out of 800. 800 doesn't mean that you answered all the questions correctly. It just means that they don't care how much better you did. Usually this is equivalent to about a 90 to 92% correct. The scoring, or the scale scoring, they want it to be very sensitive to those right at the threshold around the 75%. And once you get basically a standard deviation or 2 above that, they stop caring and they just say, yeah, you passed it. Yeah, you totally passed it. And when I took the exam, my score, I didn't get a full 800, I got a 790 some odd. I was right up there near the top. But again, it doesn't mean that I answered every question correctly. It just meant that I was far enough above the threshold that they stopped caring. There's like, yeah, you passed. Yeah, you passed. Another myth is that there are multiple correct answers to items to each question. And I get this feedback a lot from students saying, oh, that question obviously had 3 right answers. How am I to pick the most correct answer? Well, when they write these questions, again, referencing back what I talked earlier, that the questions are taken directly out of textbooks, and each question must have a textbook reference for the correct answer and the incorrect answer. I talked to multiple item writers, and I've also been to the FSBPT headquarters, and so it's just not true. There is one most correct answer, and then the other answers might have portions that are maybe partially correct or correct in different circumstances, but for that circumstance describing the question is incorrect. So if you approach it from that mindset, that when you're looking at the question, only one of these is the most correct or the safest or most effective way, it helps you answer things a bit more solidly. I remember when I came out of the exam, I felt very mad. I just had a lot of pent-up emotional anger. And it was because I was walking in thinking that there were multiple correct answers to each of these options. I thought it's arbitrary. Who are they to say? And just do yourself a favor. Just don't have that mindset and just answer the most correct and safest and most effective question. I think I talked about this earlier, not that I'm like the FSBPT's poster child. I'll be the first one to say they have some imperfections to the system. But the thing is that they represent the state boards of physical therapy. They represent the state of Idaho in a full federation of all the state jurisdictions within the United States. So when I say they're out of touch, I'm really saying that my portion of the world, the Idaho State Board of Physical Therapy, is out of touch, which would be a little bit of a stretch. And so just recognize that the FSBPT that writes the question is really made up of your state jurisdiction, as well as the other state jurisdictions as well. And then the other one is that the test is purely academic. And I think I don't have a slide in this. I'll talk about this in my first lecture on Saturday. But the test is not just academic. It incorporates a clinical perspective on almost all the material. Now, and so it's interesting perspective. And I've heard, and I disagree with people who say that, oh, the test is not academic. It's purely clinical, so forget what you learned in the books. You need to think about it clinically. I disagree with that perspective. My perspective is that the material in the textbooks, I mean, if you pull out FSBPT, or not FSBPT, if you pull out, like here, I've got my Newman's kinesiology book right here. The material contained in the textbook is absolutely testable material. However, they won't write it as a strict, pure academic question. They're not going to say, the definition of convex concave rule is what? It's not going to be that simple. Rather, they're going to make you apply it to a clinical case, or at least some sort of clinical scenario. I've heard people say that you need to just get in the mindset that you're going to be treating about 250 patients on test day. I think that's a little bit over the top to think about them all as unique clinical, full clinical scenarios. They are patients, so don't get me wrong there. When I take practice questions, I'm looking at practice questions, just evaluate it for what it says. The things they write on the question are essential to answering the question, and they eliminate things that are not essential. So just look at each question and just think of everything in the question as being important. It's just all important. It's almost always written in some sort of clinical scenario, clinical light. What would you do? What would you do next? Why would you do this? Or what would be a contraindication, or what would be a safety issue that would prevent you from doing this? Again, just thinking safety and efficacy as a physical therapist. All right, so here's a note about how to effectively study. And so I take some of this information from a Harvard article that was written several years ago about, well, let me segue into that a little bit more. This is talking about practice as physical therapists. And we're not talking about the practice of physical therapy. We're talking about what we do with our patients as we help them practice or improve or increase their ability in any given activity. So when you talk about massed practice, the definition of massed practice is just that you have your practice time is greater than your rest time. Distributed practice is the opposite, where you have rest time that is equal or greater than the practice time. This is going to be important in just a minute. So remember that term, distributed practice. Constant versus variable practice. Variable practice, this is where you practice you're not just doing a mass practice of just standing up and sitting down for 45 minutes. Rather, you're going to create a variety within the practice, meaning that you would stand up and sit down a few times. Then maybe you would stand up from a chair that swivels, or maybe stand up from a chair that has no arms, or one that does have arms. You'd create a variety to the practice. So variable practice, practicing different aspects of a task, increases the ability to adapt and generalize learning to novel situations. So I want you to remember that too for my next slide here. And then random versus blocked practice. Random practice is where you take a complicated task and you randomly practice the order of items that are done within that broad task. What would be a good example here? So like when you play basketball, you would practice shooting the ball, you'd practice dribbling the ball, you'd practice passing the ball. There's a variety of different tasks that are done within that specific activity. And what you do is you can make a random practice schedule, meaning you're going to practice this and then this in no specific order, rather than just making it all blocked. Rather than on Monday practicing all shots, Tuesday practicing all dribbles, Wednesday practicing all passes. Rather, you put them interspersed with one another, create this random practice pattern, and it can improve performance. And again, this is from a physical therapist perspective. So remember all this. Mass, distributed, constant, variable, random, and blocked practice. Okay, so now take that into your studies. And I feel like there's a direct application here with your studies. Distributed practice means your time studying and your your time not studying a topic is greater than or equal to the time that you are actually studying the topic. And what I mean by this is that, so let's say on Monday that you study a specific topic, you study musculoskeletal, but you don't, you spend some time studying your musculoskeletal. Let's say you're looking at shoulder conditions, rotator cuff interventions. On Tuesday, you don't look at it, or maybe you only look at it for about 10 minutes. You do a very quick review of what you looked at the day before. And then maybe 5 or 10 days down the road, you spend a little bit more time back on topic number one. And so it creates this pulsed pattern of studying, or a distributed practice pattern. So on day one, you have a high amount of study. Then on day two, you have a small amount of study. Day four, you have a small amount of study of this topic. So let's say we're talking about the rotator cuff. The rotator cuff intervention. On day one, you're spending a lot of time. On days 2, on days 4, on days 8, you're spending about 10 minutes looking over your notes and trying to just remember everything you studied on day 1. Then maybe on day 14, you spend a little extra time, but then go back to your distributed practice of every so often hitting for about 10 minutes what you studied about that topic. Now this takes a little bit of planning, so I want to show you what I mean. So the next day, you're going to study a different topic. Let's say you study the knee. So blue is our knee study. And you're going to follow a similar pattern here. Spend about 10 minutes on each of those days, maybe a little bit more time here. And this is how you get information to stick long term. And this is like I said, a direct correlation with what we do as physical therapists, as well as how we study for the exam. And so therefore, you can see how it would become harder to forget things or easier to remember things as you prepare for your exam day. And so as you compound this and take it a whole nother level, you get another topic and you're adding it on. So on day 2 or day 3, you're adding a new topic and you're only spending about 10 minutes each time reviewing each of the topics you saw before. By so doing, you can avoid one of the problems that students run into, is that on week 1, they study, say, the rotator, they study a topic, but then they never look at it again for 10 weeks, and then they expect themselves to remember something about it. It just doesn't work that way. You've got to study it and then remind yourself about it on a regular basis. And again, I'm basing this information on a Harvard study that was done several years ago about how to work through and remember material, academic material for an exam. The other thing is random practice. This is what practice examinations do for you, is it creates a random practice schedule, meaning that you're not just focusing only on musculoskeletal one day or only on neuromuscular another day. You can see that they start to accumulate. You start to have multiple topics given in any given day. And again, think about it. That's what the test is like. They cover a very wide variety of topics all on a single day. And you need to be able to shift gears in your mind from musculoskeletal, cardiovascular, non-systems, other systems, GI, GU, all those things. On test day, you have to shift gears between all of those. And that is very realistic to your physical therapy practice, that you have to think in a variety of systems on any given day. Practice testing, practice testing, practice testing. No one can overstate the importance of practice testing. Practice testing. If you say that too many times, it starts to sound really funny. I very much suggest that when you take practice tests or practice questions, you're doing them in a test-taking environment. What I mean by that is that you're taking it where you're not looking up the answer. You're not, I mean, how many of you have ever done this? You look at a practice question, and you're like, oh, I think it's B, I think it's B, and then you look at the answer and it was C, and it's like, oh, I knew it was C. And you convince yourself that you knew it was C even though that you thought it was B the whole time and you never had to commit. So taking a practice test in a test-taking environment is crucial because it forces you to commit to an answer. And then by committing to an answer, it forces kind of this self-awareness of, yes, I got that one wrong, or this is why I got that one wrong, or that my mindset or my thought process about that question was incorrect and I'm going to fix it now. See, Condil, do all questions on the test have a same score, or is it variable among questions? That's an, oh, I think what you're asking there is, are the questions all weighted equally? Meaning on the test, are all of the questions the same amount of points? Meaning, like, this question 1, is it worth 5 points, but question 2 is worth 7 points, and question 3 is worth 2 points. They are all equivalent. Each question is it's weighted exactly the same as any other question. And that being said, I should have said this earlier too. If you look at on the content outline, you don't have to pass every single section in order to pass the exam. There are cases, and I've seen them, where someone just totally bombs out of the musculoskeletal, but they practically ace the neuro and the cardio, and they pass the exam. Because each question is weighted equally, you don't have to pass every single section in order to pass the exam. You simply have to achieve that 600 out of 800, or approximately 75% on the entire exam in order to pass the test. So great question. I'm glad you brought that up, that you just have to, each question is weighted equally. You just have to get 75%, basically. I'll say 75%, but recognize I'm really meaning 600 out of 800. You just have to get that number of questions correct. It doesn't matter which content, categories, body system, whatever. You just have to get that many number. That's the threshold. So Varun, you're asking a great question. How much percentage of score is good for the latest PEAT to know that my practice is good? General idea. So the PEAT examination, if any of you are not familiar with the PEAT examination stands for the Practice Examination and Assessment Tool. It is essentially 2 practice tests that are given by the FSBPT, the people who create the test. One of them is an actual retired, they're actual questions that were actually given to students. And so the predictive value of the PEAT is very high if you're taking it in a test-taking environment. So the PEAT is a great way to gauge your performance. I highly recommend taking the PEAT. Usually my best recommendation there is to take it somewhere around 3 weeks before exam day, because 3 weeks before exam day, 2 or 3 weeks before exam day, gives you a chance to take it and get the predictive value of it. But if the predictive value is not good, or really just with anyone, it gives you a couple of weeks to remediate and improve the areas that you were not so good at. And so taking it with a little bit of time left over gives you a chance to use it for predictive value and for a study tool to help you get through the content that you need to. All right, Kandil, but the PEAT is easier than the NPTE. You know, I have a lot of students who say that the PEAT is easier than the NPTE. I don't know what to say to that, because the PEAT questions are actual exam questions. There's 2 forms. One is a practice form, which were not actually given, the questions were not actually given to students, but they were created in the same method. But the other one is an actual NPTE that was actually given to students. And so I have had people tell me the PEAT, they feel like the PEAT was a little bit easier than the NPTE, but great question there. I don't have a solid answer for you there, other than I believe it's fairly equivalent. Cecilia, do they change the PEAT? Yes, for 2018, they changed the PEAT. I don't anticipate they'll change the PEAT again until probably 2020 or 2021. They don't change the PEAT very often because it reflects the content outline. They don't feel there's a need to change it every 3 months or every 6 months, same content. So if you just bought the PEAT last week, it is going to be the same PEAT this week, next week, and probably even all the way through next year. All right. Swarita, how early prior to test date do you suggest we start taking practice exams? Great question. Okay, so Swarita, your question is, when should you start taking practice exams? My biggest suggestion there is that you take a practice exam on a regular basis. Now, the regular, that'll depend on the number of practice questions or practice tests you have access to. There are about 11 solid practice exams out there. I have a practice exam. Score Builders has 5. Therapy Ed has 3. So that's 6, 9, plus the 2 PEATs, we're up to 11. 11 high-quality practice exams. I would suggest taking one sooner than later, taking one very early, it doesn't matter which one, but take a good practice exam early. Use it to gauge where you stand on a lot of the content. You can see where you are musculoskeletal, neuromuscular. You can see your weaknesses, and then that should help guide some of your studying to say, okay, yes, I am weak in musculo. I can see that on this test, and so I'm going to spend some time working on that content. Let's see. Now, Natalie, since when does Score Builders have 5? They have 3 as a part of their book. So when you buy the Score Builders book, I won't grab it, but I've got the Score Builders book here. Oh wait, no, I've got it right here. That's the story of my office here. Is like nothing but textbooks. So the Score Builders book comes with 3 practice exams of its own. Plus, you can purchase their Online Advantage, which is another additional 2 practice questions, or I keep saying practice questions, 2 practice exams that you can get online. So making a total of 5 that are available from the Score Builders. So 3 in the book, 2 online. And I just talked to the Therapy Ed folks, the O'Sullivan folks. They still only have 3 available as a part of their textbook deal. They don't have any online supplemental or additional exams yet. The Score Builders has the 5. Let's see, Zoya, I bought the PEAT last year and I've not used it yet. Do I need to repurchase the PEAT? Yes, the access to the PEAT expires. I believe it's 60 days, and you can purchase an extension for up to 90 days. But yeah, I think it would be unfortunately, it would be a repurchase there, unless you could call them and somehow tell them you never used it. But I doubt that would get you anywhere. Miguelina, any recommendation for us to create a study calendar? Do you have examples, perhaps? Yes, as a part of when we get going in our live course here, starting next week, one of our coaches, she went through and she created. Well, I've got a couple of examples of study calendars. They are examples and they are individualized to the person. But I recommend just getting a paper calendar, piece of paper, and write down the topics, and well, on a separate piece of paper, write down your top 10 worst topics, or topics that you know you have troubles with, and then put it in a schedule that looks a lot like this. So on day 1, you study this, on day 2, you study this, day 3, you study this, but then small reviews on a regular basis to not forget any of the good stuff you learned. Let's see, Ruta, if I purchase the PEAT a second time, would the questions be different? If you purchased it more than about 6 months ago, because they switched right after the October exam, so right around October 31st. If you purchased before the end of October of last year, chances are that it will be different for you, that you purchased the 2017 version and now the 2018 version. So yes, it would be different. But if you purchased last week or last month or even in December, it would be the same. It would be exactly the same. Oh, and the other option you have, they don't talk about this very much, but the PEAT, they actually have so there's the individual version, but there's also an academic version. If you can, and that academic version is only available to school administrators. And so if you can go to your school and say, hey, I need another PEAT, can you purchase it for me and I'll reimburse you if you purchase the academic PEAT? And so I can look at that version of the PEAT. That is an option. Most people don't need to go that far, but if you really needed another version of the PEAT, the academic version of the PEAT is something you could go for. Let's see. Romel, do you have an updated version of the PT final exam practice exam that reflects more on the FSBPT outline? Yes, so I've been making updates. The nice part about that practice exam is that it's all online, and so I can make updates to it on a very regular basis. Right now, I admit on the scoring section, I haven't taken the time and changed the verbiage for the lymphatic system ones, but it still reflects what is on the exam, even if some of the verbiage on that, and that's one of my tasks for this next week is to get some of that put together. But yes, updated for 2018 and reflects the content of 2018. Let's see. Olivia, I have last year's book and they updated it. Should I purchase a new book? I wouldn't spend my money on a new book. I mean, so like this one, I think this was which one was this one? Oh, my goodness, I guess this is a few years old. This is the 2012 version of the Score Builders book. I have a newer one somewhere around here. I have the newest one around here. Usually very minor changes between each year's edition, so I wouldn't spend a lot of money on updating the textbooks from one edition or two editions old to the newest edition. I mean, if it was like this one in 2012, you might consider moving it up to maybe, the 2015 or 2016 version. But the content in those study guides is not changing dramatically. In fact, very, very little. And that's the case. I mean, that's kind of the racket of all of the textbooks out there, is that they create these newer versions and make you pay for new versions, but they've only changed less than 1% of the items and maybe just changed the coloring on some of the tables. And you're left scratching your head of why you paid for the newest version when it's exactly like the old version. Let's see. Cecilia, therapy ed is harder than the score builders. Yes, most students tell me that the therapy ed questions are typically a little bit harder than the score builders questions. Let's see. Jason, I have the 2015 score builders. How is it different with the new edition? It's probably not going to be a lot different. 2015 probably be very similar. Very, very similar. Heather, can we see the examples of the calendars if we've already purchased the live course? Sure, yeah. It'll be, let's see, Alana will talk about that, and Nirja will talk about that. And I can email me, and I can certainly help you find those. Amy, is your 200 questions a timed exam? I have it in PDF form and in an online form. The online form, it does have a timing function. It doesn't have an auto kick out after 4 hours. It's 200 questions. It doesn't have an auto kick out function. But the PDF version, you can take, run a stopwatch on yourself. Romel will have access to it since I purchased the home bundle a while back. Awesome. Is one study guide enough, or different guides to cover different material? Ruda, great question. I recommend the textbooks and maybe one study guide. Those of you who take my online course, I have a study guide and a workbook key. I have a lot of study guide material, but still that cannot supplant or I cannot overstate the importance of having textbooks to be able to research the items that are still very difficult for you, or that maybe you've really forgotten or need some help on. Study guides are good for a review, a light review, and I'm speaking across the board here. My study guide, the Score Builders, Therapy Ed, they're all a light review. It's the Score Builders, like the one I've got here, Score Builders, it's like 500 pages worth to cover about 2,000 or, no, more like 10,000 pages of actual textbook knowledge. And so if you never learned it the first time, the study guide is not enough. And so that's why I can't overstate the importance of good textbooks. Let's see. Looking at James, I hope it's my feed, not yours, but your feed has been awful. I'm sorry about that. I guess I can do a quick sound and video check. It seems like I'm coming through. On my side, it's all green bars as far as the internet goes. Sometimes the internet gremlins just cause grief. Am I coming through loud and clear? Let's do a quick sound and video check. Anyone sound, video? Yes, good. All green on your end? Okay, good. All green on this end, and I try to control as much of that as I can. But sometimes the internet service provider or wherever, on a positive note, those of you who take the live course and are worried about internet feeds, you can also, I do provide, or I guess what I want to say, I don't give it default, but you can dial an 800 number and listen to the voice over telephone. Obviously you don't get the PowerPoint slide over telephone, but it is an option if you're really worried about internet or it's just, consistently very poor. And the other thing is I record everything just in case you miss something, so you can go back and review it a later time. Andrew, Will, what's your email address? Best way, and I've got it here on the last slide, but it's admin@ptfinalexam.com, or you can click on the contact bar of ptfinalexam.com and you can contact me directly there. Swadita, in the agenda for your website, you mentioned personal review and question and answer for almost a month. What's actually covered in those sessions as part of a syllabus? So Swadita, great question. Let me pause on that one. I will talk about that in a little bit. I want to make sure I get this slide all done, and then I'll definitely be talking about the course. Okay, so number 4 item here, so kind of picking up, we took a little hiatus there on distributed practice, random practice, test-taking environments. The other thing is having high-density, high-yield studying. I am a firm believer that 10 hours of low yield studying is equivalent to 2 hours of good studying. How many of you have had that experience? You sit down to study and you're checking Facebook, you're watching cat videos, I mean, you're talking to your friend, and you walk home at the end of the day and you're like, yeah, sweet, I got 10 hours of studying in. But really, how much studying did you actually get done? And so this is so important for people who, I know I have a lot of students who come through who have full-time family responsibilities, maybe young children, they have full-time jobs, clinicals. I mean, there's a lot going on in life. So I really think that if you can dedicate, turn off the distractions and focus your energy on a topic for 2 hours, you can get done in 2 hours what some people get done in 10 hours. That's the high yield studying. And again, it's a mindset change. What topics are you going to master today? Not just, again, I feel like there's a big difference between reading a textbook and learning material. When you're learning material, you're taking the material in the textbook and you're putting it in your own words, you're explaining it aloud, you're working on answering the why behind, well, why is that, or I understand that now. You're having light bulb type moments rather than, I can't tell you how many students have emailed me and said, Will, I read O'Sullivan from cover to cover and I still failed the exam. And I just shake my head. I just have to say, well, sure, you read it, but did any of it stick? You've got to get the information to stick in your head. And in my opinion, reading is, and it's not just my opinion, but statistically speaking, you only remember about 10% of what you read. But you remember 90% of what you read, of what you hear, and what you teach or somehow interact actively with. And then number 6, one of my favorites, is balance in the force. Make sure to take care of yourself. This is a picture of a test zombie. If you hate studying, you tend to avoid it. And so classic example is you lock yourself in the basement for 12 hours, say, I'm not coming up, I'm here from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. You tend to hate every second of it, and you look forward to the moment when you can shut the books and run out screaming from your test or from your study cave. Rather, put it, study like crazy when you're studying, but then take care of yourself the other time. So this includes exercise, nourishment, quality time with friends. Obviously, the balance. I'm not saying, just go and spend all day at the movie theater and hit all, have a Lord of the Rings or, an office party where you watch all 12 seasons of The Office or something. But rather, when you're studying, study. When playing, play. And just make a conscious effort to have balance in your life as you approach your studies. Now, I'm always worried about giving that advice because I'm worried that some people will take it and say, oh, well, Will says that, I need to take care of myself. I need to go on this, cruise to Cancun or something next week, just before the exam to make sure that, I'm well balanced. That's not exactly the case. What I'm saying is just take care of yourself. Try not to hate studying, rather try to master content and get good at it. Okay, so answering questions here. May, how many hours do we spend for the live course? I'm going to talk about that. In fact, yeah, let's talk about that next. Okay, so PT Final Exam, I run a live online review course. You can see the details there. You can go to ptfinalexam.com and you can check the live course. There's a top menu. You can click enroll. And anyway, you can find all of the courses we have, from our live courses to our independent courses. One of the things that I love pointing out is that we take reviews like you'd expect on Amazon products. We take real reviews from students. We give them a chance to rate us, to leave us feedback, tell us their story. It's more than just testimonials. And I urge you, as you consider ways of preparing for the exam, that you avoid just the testimonial-based stuff, because usually you can pick and choose 3 or 4 good ones, and you'll think you're getting one thing, but you get in and you're like, oh, that's not what I'm after. So I take unedited reviews, and we've got nearly 350 5-star reviews. They are inspiring. I really recommend, even if you don't buy anything from me or whatever, just go check out those reviews. You'll love hearing the stories of people who are they are successful at what they do. They love what they do, and they are now practicing as physical therapists because they worked like crazy and passed the NPTE. We have an awesome pass rate, over 90% for full participants in the class. And again, I really hang my hat on that, because a lot of times we're dealing, I'll be honest with you, many students don't bother looking up review courses until they've had a failed attempt. And so I deal a lot with high-risk students, people who have learning disabilities, people who need a little extra help getting through the exam. I also get a lot of people who are trying to reinstate their license after being away from the field for a time. I had a great example, I guess kind of a poster child for that. I had a 63-year-old woman last summer who was reinstating her license after 30 years out. She'd raised a family, had not been a physical therapist for 30 years, and reinstated her license. She was able to pass on her first attempt back after taking our course. And she just needed some time. She just needed the content, and she was able to pass. And so when you look at that perspective, the kind of the cross section of students we take, we get people through the exam, and we have a lot of fun doing it. Someone asked a question about how many hours a day. So we meet, as a part of our live course, we meet 4 times each week. We meet on Saturday mornings, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday evenings. We meet for about 1 to 2 hours each. And we go all the way from, we're starting on March 3rd, and we're going to go all the way through test day in April. And we do that 8 weeks before every single exam day. So we'll be doing the same thing in May, August, and November, preparing for the subsequent or the following exam dates. Now let's see, was it Swadita that asked about, in the syllabus, you'll find that we push really hard during the first 4 weeks of our class, but then the second 4 weeks are a little bit more laid back. We have an equal number of live sessions, but those live sessions in the second half of our course are more what we call them bonus sessions, and we just go over content. We just, really hammer out content that students are having questions with. We talk about just content, all the things that you're going to find that are very commonly tested, students very commonly have troubles with, and we crush out. We'll have over 50 hours of live time in the course, which, by the way, it's $4.99 for the 3-month access. You'll have a hard time finding a 50-hour live course for anything close to that. I just went to CSM in New Orleans, and let's see, how many credits were they offering? They were offering something like 16 credit hours for attending I was there as an exhibitor, so I didn't attend any lectures this time. But for 16 hours of lecture time, they were charging $1,000 for non-members. And so, again, you look at the disparity between the number of hours and the cost. And anyway, I feel like the cost is very fair. We try to crush out as much content as possible. I also have a till you pass access option. Those of you who need a little more help or want extended access, you can have access for up to 2 years in the till you pass access. And again, that gives you access to all the coaches, gives you access to me, getting your questions answered. To find all of the details, go to this page. So if you go to the Enroll tab, and you can go about halfway down, you'll see a calendar, and you can see the exact dates, times, exactly what days and times we're going through. And we update that. That's a live feed calendar, so you can see when we're having our sessions and make sure you're all the way up to date. Let's see. What else do I want to say there? So I think I answered the question there. Let's see, what the other question was, how many hours do we spend for the live course? We'll have about 50 live hours, kind of give or take, depends on how discussions go. We'll have quite a few live hours. I've also got pre-recorded hours, including like the non-systems domain, integumentary, gait, lymphatics. What else? I'm adding stuff all the time there, so I'm adding more and more content as we go, and get all of that independent study course as well. Let's see. Just looking through the questions here. So Josephine, can you or will in your class suggest how to break up topics? Saying I was studying master musculoskeletal one day seems daunting. Well, yes. Sorry, I shouldn't put it in such broad terms. As a part of the course, I assign a workbook. I don't have my workbook with me right now. It's an electronic workbook, so you get access to it immediately. In the workbook, we assign out pages and tables on the workbook that you are to complete each week. And as you're completing those topics, I'm a huge proponent, and I try to hammer this home, that I don't want it to ever be busy work. I want it to just be structure for your studying. A lot of people love the structure that comes with a workbook. I use the FSBPT content outline to create it, and it's just all the topics you'll see on the exam. And it's all in table format. I have a workbook key with some suggested ways of looking at it or suggested ways of wording it to help you remember it. It's not a copy-paste assignment. It's not I've got to get through this just so I can tell Will I finished it. Rather, it's a way to work through small chunks of the material each day. I highly recommend that you skip things that are easy for you and spend time on things that are hard for you. And that workbook really helps kind of put it right in front of you, so you can see what you're working on globally, and then really hone in and say, okay, I'm going to do this day, I'm going to do these pages this day, and really break it up on a daily basis. So I hope that answers that, Josephine. Ruta, any recommendations on which textbook to best cover general medicine stuff? In my NPTE, I got many questions like blood tests, changes how to show heart attack, cancer. Nothing was covered in the O'Sullivan textbook. My favorite one there, pardon me while I dive off the screen. This is probably one of my favorite ones, the pathology implications for the physical therapist. So this is by Goodman. This is the third edition by Goodman, pathology. That's one of the key ones there. The other one, and I saw some of you mentioning this is another one by Goodman, but it's also the differential diagnosis for physical therapists, referral for screening. That can also help a lot when it comes to all of that. So those are my favorite there. Obviously, physical rehabilitation is a good one. I won't pull up that one yet. It's down here on the floor. Good. Let's see. Natalie, so is it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday each week? Because on the course they say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Oh, I've got yes, it'll be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Sorry about that. Saturday, yeah, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Amparito, do independent study people, I like the independent study people, get access to the live materials? No. If you purchase the independent study course, which I have that as low as $99, it's a much less expensive option. You don't get any of the live access. You don't get access to the coaches, but you get access to just the recordings. Really just recordings is all. Let's see. Alan, send me an email and we can talk about that. Heather, does week 1 assignment start after Saturday's lecture? Yes. Swadita, when taking your live course, will the videos cover the most necessary stuff? Like, can I start preparing topics in the order classes go? During class, you mentioned which study materials refer to a topic, referring to listen to us. The short answer to all that, Swadita, is yes. We try to cover the things. We've been doing this for years now. Most commonly tested and the most commonly problematic items are what we cover as a part of the course. Amy's tonight a 2-hour webinar. Not planning on 2 hours. I do have some practice questions I want to get to. I want to make sure everyone's questions get answered, but I'm thinking we're going to be close to 90 minutes on tonight's lecture. Just FYI, 90 minutes. So yeah, we've got about another 18 minutes to go. And I'm not one to, I don't watch the clock a lot just because I want to make sure we get the content done. And if anyone has to jet or has to leave early, I do record everything in case you have to leave or in case we get long-winded and you want to go back and watch it. One of the fun things about the recordings is you can watch them you can do a variable speed playback, so you can actually watch me in 2x speed and go double speed and have me sound like a chipmunk. Or you can slow it way down if you want to hear me slow down about a certain topic. Sometimes that's just entertaining to listen to people in fast speed or slow speed. Let's see, I'm Burrito. I'm just debating because I'm planning on taking the exam in July, so I wanted to try the independent student first before going all out until I'm closer to the exam. That's a great way to look at it. You can try the independent study course. Gives you access to the recordings. The independent study course is a previously recorded live class, so you get to see a lot of what we talk about in the live class, just in a recorded setting. But you don't get the access to live webinars, the question and answer you see we're doing in the chat box, and then access to the coaches. That's part of the live course, which live course, we have a lot of fun. Aguarav, is your recording available through smartphones? Yep, you access everything. Like, I know a lot of people just have electronic personal devices, so like iPads or iPhones or Android or whatever. You just have tablets rather than full desktop computers. But yeah, access to all of it that way. Jillian, do you recommend following the calendar? How long does it take to go through a guide chart that you give us? There will be time to stay outside of the guide if needed. Great question. The short answer is yes. I think that's the short answer. Do you recommend following the calendar? How long does it take to go through each guide and chart? The time to go through each part of, so you're talking about the workbook where I've got the charts. the time to go through it depends on your familiarity with the content. So for instance, if you did all of your, if you did a clinical at or outpatient orthopedic and you just love, your CI specialized in rotator cuffs and total knee replacements, and you're just the world's, expert at total knee replacements and rotator cuff repairs, then you're gonna skip all that stuff. Versus the things, and then you'll spend time on the things that maybe you didn't spend time on. So let's say you did a part of your rotation. Well, let's say none of your rotations included cardiac rehabilitation. So you're obviously going to spend a lot more time on cardiac rehab as compared to, say, your rotator cuff rehab or your total knee replacement rehab. So what he said, if I plan to take the July session, can I access the materials until then, though I start live sessions now? There's the 3-month access plan or the Till You Pass access plan. So whichever one fits best. So if you were to start today with the 3-month access plan, you'd have access all the way through mid-May or May 27th, I guess. So 3 months from now. Andres, thank you so much. I'll pay you later. Highly recommend Will's course. Awesome. And I, like I said, I was just at CSM down, the Combined Sections meeting for the American Physical Therapy Association. And I printed out my workbooks, which are all available online as a part of the courses. But that was something that really drew students in, is just having the structure and the accountability of the course. And we have a lot of fun doing it too. We just have a lot of fun. Perito, can I do the live course now and do the independent course after? Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So it's not mandatory to answer all the workbook assignments, but focus on the areas you're weaker in. Andrew, yes, that is exactly right. Oh, you're speaking to my soul there. The workbook is not, again, this is adult learning at its finest. I can't give a grade. You don't pass or fail my course, which translates into passing or failing the NPTE. Rather, you just work on, I help guide you through the things that are hard for you with the target of passing the NPTE. And so, I mean, I'll be the first to say, you get what you put into it. If you just, if you sign up and then do nothing, then nothing will happen. But if you sign up and, you're in earnest and you come and you do what we tell you and you're a part of our discussions, our average score increase is 50 points. Our average score increase, my record holders increased their score 150 points. I mean, there's just, we help get content to stick, and we have a lot of fun doing it. Let's see, Kristen, when should we schedule to take the practice exams, send in our scores? At the end of each week? Kristen, great question. It depends on your schedule. I know some people are in full-time jobs and they can't do it until, say, Saturday afternoons is the only time they have for that, because I do want you to dedicate some time to it. And so as much as I can recommend, as energetically as I can recommend, I would recommend you take the practice exams at the same time of day that you'll be taking the real exam. So for instance, if your NPTE is scheduled at 8 a.m., that's when I took my NPTE, was at 8 a.m., I would recommend taking practice exams at 8 a.m. so you can practice what it feels like to think and get the juices flowing at 8 a.m. So it does depend a little bit on your specific schedule. And like, I'm super flexible when it comes to that. If you're like, I didn't have time this week, but I'll get it done next week, don't feel stressed from me. Just the only big deadline is that NPTE. As long as we get it all done before the NPTE, we're solid. And as I promised, there is a special bonus. Those of you who are sticking around here till the end, I put my lymphatic videos as a part of a free mini course. So even those of you who anyone who chooses not to sign up for my course, which, by the way, the lymphatic courses are all included in the independent study course and the live review courses. But as a promo for being here, appreciate you sticking around. You can access the lymphatic videos that I've got up, which represent the biggest change for 2018. At the end of this session, you'll be redirected to a page where you can click on the free lymphatic course video or free lymphatic course sign up. And essentially, you'll sign up for a free mini course, 100% free, no credit card, no nothing. You just sign up and you can get the lymphatic videos. It'll be super fun. As fun as lymphatics get. I mean, I'm not a lymphatic therapist. I've treated lymphedema, a handful of times. Deal with, like, for instance, I've got a very sweet aunt of mine who had a radical mastectomy for breast cancer, and she has a persistent lymphedema in her upper extremity, which just requires some maintenance care as far as compression garments and watching it. And so But I've also had some full-blown lymphedema cases that we did lymphatic drainage massage, we did the compressive wraps. And so I speak from experience in this lymphatic course. So yeah, be sure to, when we finish up here, it'll automatically redirect you to the page where you'll be able to sign up for free for that lymphatic course. Let's see. Just looking through some of the questions. Sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once here, which usually ends up me doing one thing well and one thing poorly. Let's see, Ruta. So if I cannot participate in the live webinars, better choice is the independent study. Does it include the videos of the webinars? Yes, Ruta, the independent study course is a previously recorded course. It's all recorded and you can access at your leisure. Heather, what do I think about the NPTE app? It depends on which app. Send me a link via email and we can talk about it. Most of those question a day apps are pretty good. They help you get through a lot of content. Okay, let's talk about some practice questions. Practice questions. Okay, I know this is what y'all came for. I've got some awesome practice questions which you're going to love. So, as I clear off my desk, got to get all those textbooks off. Don't want my desk to collapse in the middle of all this. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a practice question. What you're going to find is that those of you who are watching on a desktop, you're going to see me manipulating the screen just a little bit. You'll see me posting what's called a poll, or a way to look at essentially where you can click in your answer. Those of you who are on a mobile device, unfortunately, you'll have to kind of flip between screens to be able to see the slide and then put in your answer option. In fact, some of you have already started to answer this question. Thank you. So, and I should say that on the exam there is no penalty for guessing. If in doubt, just guess, and make as much of an educated guess as you can. But just never leave an option blank. I'll talk about that more on Saturday. But never, ever, ever leave a question blank. Always, at the very least, put something in because it gives you 25%. Like those of you who are clicking in an answer now, give you 25%. I like it. Okay, so here is your question. I'm going to put my timer on for 72 seconds because that's the amount of time that you should average while doing your questions. During those 72 seconds, I'm going to be quiet, and your time begins now. If you don't mind, please don't type in your answer, but click it in the poll. So don't type it in, just click it in. And go, and I'll be quiet while you answer. All right, about 10 more seconds. 10 more seconds. And time. And I always tease that, I say I'll be quiet while you answer the question, but really I should be coughing. I should be making a distraction for you so you can answer like if you're at a prometric testing center. All right, so a patient who has suffered a traumatic blow to the knee begins to exhibit signs of tibial nerve dysfunction. Which of the following impairments will most likely be present with a tibial nerve injury at the knee, at the level of the knee? So the correct answer is that D, or number 4. The trauma to the tibial nerve would weaken plantar flexion, alter sensation in the plantar surface of the foot. So again, you can see where your anatomy is coming to play into application of weak dorsiflexion from an injury at the level of the knee. Injury at the level of the knee. So now my follow-up question to you, and a lot of you got this one right. So my follow-up question to this, and this is where I have lots of fun in the course, because I love asking follow-up questions. My follow-up question to you is, what gait deviation would this guy show with a tibial nerve injury at the level of the knee? So we just said weak plantar flexion. What gait deviation, what would you call his gait deviation? What is the term, the name for his gait deviation from the tibial nerve injury resulting in the weak plantar flexion of the ankle? And go ahead and type this one in. I'm looking for you to type this one in. And I always love asking this question. Love asking this question. So what would you call this gait pattern? What would you call this gait pattern? Okay, so we have some votes for steppage or drop foot, calcaneus gait, a lot of votes for foot drop. Any other votes? What other gait deviations can you think of that would involve plantar flexors, not dorsiflexors, plantar flexors? Vaulting, toe first contact. You lack push-off. Amy, oh, you speak to my soul. Amy, have you heard this one before? You speak to my soul. You lack push-off. His dorsiflexors are doing just fine, because if you recall, the common peroneal nerve exits or comes away from the sciatic nerve above the level of the knee. So your common peroneal nerve, which includes the deep peroneal nerve, remember the deep peroneal nerve is what gives rise to the dorsiflexors or the tibialis anterior. His dorsiflexion would be fine. His dorsiflexion is just awesome, but his plantar flexion is the pits. So I'll tell you the answer is not the steppage gait or the foot drop gait. And I don't know why, but that's every class I do, that's always everyone's first, first blush. They just, automatically say the steppage gait pattern. Let's talk about that for a minute. So the steppage gait pattern is essentially your foot drop. This means that as you go into the swing phase of gait, your foot flops down into a plantar flexed position because your dorsiflexors are not holding your toe up. And so in order to not catch your toe on the floor, you have to flex your hip and knee to get it to clear the floor. And so that's what's called a steppage gait pattern, So this guy, I would have taken two answers here. There's two semi-equivalent answers here that I would have taken as far as what this guy with a tibial nerve injury would be eliciting. There's something called the double step gait pattern that is identical to the antalgic gait pattern. But the cause is what's different. In antalgic gait patterns comes from pain, and so it's very painful, and so you try to get off that foot as quickly as possible. Whereas the double step gait pattern, it's where the push off of the foot is decreased. His plantar flexors are not working, so he's not pushing off during the pre-swing phase of gait. He can't push off. And so because he can't push off, let's say it's his right foot, because he can't push off well with his right foot, his gait cycle is abbreviated on that, or that swing phase on the left is abbreviated, and so his left foot takes a shortened step length. But the swing phase on the right is just fine. He can swing just fine. His toes are up fine. Everything's fine on the swing phase. It's just during the pre-swing phase of gait. Terminal stands for pre-swing, where those plantar flexors are really starting to work. So if I were to draw out the double step gait pattern, if let's see, I'm going to try to draw it sideways. I've never drawn it sideways. I usually draw it going up. Okay, so let's say that our right foot, so if this is our left foot, taking a step with our right foot, it's a normal step length as the right is swinging forward, but the left foot takes an abbreviated step. The right foot comes ahead for a normal step length. So right is normal, left is abbreviated, and so it creates this double step gait pattern. You'll hear, if you were to hear the cadence, would be step, 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 because it's abbreviated. That's the double step gait pattern. And again, I want to drive home this point that for both antalgic and the double step gait pattern, the contralateral foot is the shortened, or the contralateral foot has the shortened step length. Contralateral foot, so our right is the problem child. We have weak plantar flexors on the right side. And so the left is the step length that's abbreviated because you're not pushing off very well on that right foot, and so that left comes down earlier, not as far ahead. So how's that for the double step gait pattern? I do recognize it's not a very common name. I know we don't hear it very much. I know that the steppage gait pattern is much more, I mean, it's honestly much more common and frequently mentioned, but the antalgic gait pattern or the double step gait pattern is essentially the same. Or I guess what do I say? These two are essentially the same and are different than the foot drop pattern. With the antalgic gait pattern, the step length would look equivalent, but remember the right foot really hurts, so you're going to get off onto your left foot as quickly as possible. So you'll take that ginger step on the right and get on that left as fast as possible. But then the swing phase is usually pretty normal because your weight is off of that leg. So you can swing normally, and then when you come down, you get off it as fast as you can. So you create that double step gait pattern. Good. Any questions about steppage gait patterns versus double step or antalgic gait patterns? Again, big key I want to drive home here is that this question does not mention any problem with the dorsiflexors. It mentions the tibial nerve injury, which the tibial nerve affects the plantar flexors. And so because the plantar flexors are not working, you have to then apply that to the gait cycle and say, which phase of the gait cycle are the plantar flexors the most active? And there you'd say, well, obviously during the pre-swing phase, terminal stance, they're eccentrically lengthening, and then during pre-swing, they're contracting to advance your body weight forward. Good. Oh, and by the way, there's, as a part of the independent course or the live course, I've got a whole series on gait. You can go and watch. They're ones I recorded a couple of years ago, so I don't have the fancy blue microphone in those ones, but which, it's a lovely microphone, isn't it? Fancy blue microphone, but it still gets the job done. I draw out and do some diagrams on the gait patterns. Gait patterns, common aberrant gait patterns or abnormal gait patterns. Okie doke. So one more question. Let's go ahead and do one more question. This will be the last question. Those who are wondering how long we're going to go, we've already gone 90 minutes. We're just going to blast through this one real quick. Unless you guys don't want to go over more content. If you want, we can keep going. Anyone who has to go, I'm not offended. I understand. Totally understand. Let's see. Swapna, does this same concept hold same even if the obesity of the patient will? The antalgic gait pattern, it should be the same, yes. Heather, when you create pictures on the slides, will those be on the recorded version? Yes. So Heather, great question. Okay, so here is your next question. I'm going to give you 72 seconds. I can see some of you already guessing, which is awesome. 72 seconds. I'm going to be quiet while you answer, so go ahead and start now. Please click in your answer. Don't just click it in. And by the way, they're anonymous. I can't see who's answering what. So just go ahead and click in. About 10 more seconds. About 10 more seconds. All right, and time. Good. So this one, again, this one's about a 60-40 split. So this is a good topic. And I didn't choose 2-foot questions by accident. I know that a lot of people have a weakness when it comes to the foot. I don't know why. We love knees and we love hips, we love shoulders, but we tend to avoid the feet. I don't know why. I mean, I guess they're stinky and we just don't like feet very much. I remember in my first clinical, I had a guy, he was a teenager, he came in and he took his shoe and sock off, and this man hadn't bathed in weeks. And you could almost see the odor coming out of his foot. And I remember my clinical instructor very kindly took the lead on that case, and I got to stand back and just kind of cover my nose the whole time. It was one of those experiences. You've all had those experiences as you go out through your clinicals that you're like, oh wow, oh wow. So here you go. Here's another foot topic for you. A patient is noted to have limited great toe extension. Great toes, so the first phalanx of the foot, the first MTP joint, during the terminal stance phase of gait. So as you recall, during terminal stance, your foot essentially does something like this. You're going to terminal stance, you come down, and your toe is extended, and that's obviously very exaggerated. But your toe goes into a lot of extension right before you do the toe off. You push a lot of force through that toe. It's also part of the windlass effect. The windlass effect is what affects plantar fasciitis. And so, anyway, so great toe extension is limited, hypomobile. So which of the following mobilizations would be most appropriate to improve the mobility of the first MTP joint? So the correct answer is that dorsal glide. This comes back to the convex concave rule. So you guys remember the convex concave rule? Does anyone remember the convex concave rule? Convex. Does this ring a bell for anybody? Concave. Let me do it. Concave moves in the same direction. When we talk about convex and concave, the way I remember it, for whatever it's worth, is that in concave and same, they both have an A. And that's how I've always remembered it. With concave joints, you move the mobile segment in the same direction that you're trying to go, the roll and glide. Remember, this is talking about roll and glide. Roll and glide. Okay, so let's draw an example here. So if this is our typical joint, we have a convex portion and we have a concave portion. Now, in this example that I talked about here, about the first MTP joint, the MTP joint is the distal segment is concave. So if we come back to the whiteboard here, this is the most distal segment, so I'll write that here, distal, or this is what you'd call the proximal phalanx, and this is the metatarsal. Concave, I should write it down. Concave, moving on a convex surface. Now, when you're looking at the convex concave rule, you consider which is the mobile segment and which is the fixed segment. Mobile versus fixed. Almost always, the distal is usually the mobile segment. And that should make sense, right? That, for instance, in the foot, you can stabilize the proximal foot and mobilize the distal portion a lot easier. But recognize you can switch it. And we don't really have time to talk. I'll talk about that in the live course when we get down to, I think, our third lecture. I'll talk about some of the strange cases. I'll also talk about the thumb and the saddle joints. I know some of you are putting down some saddle joints here, which is confusing, and I'll talk about those as a part of the live course. For here, we're talking about the basic principle, convex, concave. The way I think about it is that, so in this example, so if this is my concave portion and this is my convex portion, as I go into extension, or as I'm moving, as I'm rolling, I slide with it, and that concave portion stays in contact with the surface. Now, if I switched it, let's say my convex portion sitting in a concave, as I roll that convex portion, you can see how the way I've always thought about it is that the convex portion would roll out of the joint if it didn't glide back up in. So it's the roll and glide occur in the opposite direction. That's how I remember that. All right, in this case, remember we're talking about the great toe, or the first toe, or the big toe, that in order to improve our dorsiflexion, or I shouldn't say dorsiflexion, our extension, our great toe extension, we are going to glide that proximal phalanx. We're going to glide that proximal phalanx in a dorsal direction. So dorsal glide, it's an extension roll and a dorsal glide. So your force would be pushing the person into a dorsal, pushing them dorsally to help assist with the great toe extension. Let's see, talking about the thumb, the smaller joints difficult to recall. As much as I remember, there are just 8 convex joints, easy to memorize. Oh, Ruder, that's a good way to put it. I've never thought about it quite like that. Okay, I'm sure you can get Google to do it. Okay, so this is how I remember it. I remember convex, concave. The concave portions are moving in the same direction. They both have an A, and then you just have to look at what the joint looks like. The other classic example is the wrist. I'll just do the wrist real quick. So with our wrist, I'll change color just for fun, because it's always fun to change color, right? So with the wrist, you have the radius comes down, looks something like this. And then the ulna comes down. You've got a styloid process, something like that. And then you have the carpal bones that sit like this. And you've got all your fingers up here. Okay, as you can see, this is the concave portion is here. And this, or the carpals, are the convex portion. So you would glide in the opposite direction of the roll. So if you wanted to move the wrist into extension, so moving the wrist into blipped out for a second. You're going to glide palmarly. There's going to be a palmar glide. Palmar glide. Because remember, the convex moves in the opposite direction. Convex moves in the opposite direction. So there you go. That is your wrist and toe. And it did freeze for just a second. Am I back, guys? Quick sound video. Am I back? Back in the saddle again? Sometimes I tease that when my video freezes and you can see my face frozen, it's kind of like Bell's palsy. And, everything's frozen on one side, for whatever it's worth. Okay, so there you go. That was my little spiel about the foot. I hope you enjoyed the foot discussion. We're going to be talking about a lot more. I love taking questions and answering them based on I like to answer what students' questions are. I mean, we do have some pre-prepared content that we go through that's very commonly tested, but I love getting students to ask questions so we can answer them. The reason is I was in PT school. I was one of those kids. I never raised my hand to ask a question, mostly because I hadn't thought of the question. But I find that when I'm in a group of people, I love listening to the questions they ask, usually because it's something I hadn't thought of or a way I hadn't thought of before. And I'm usually, nodding my head and saying, yeah, that's a great question. I'm really glad he asked that question. So then I can learn from the question, from the answer that the instructor gives. And so that's something that you really gain as a part of the live course. You get to think about things from other students' perspectives too. You can hear what the questions are. Kandil, let's see. If we cover differential diagnosis interventions well, are we fine? Well, yes, obviously. You have to know your examination, your interventions, and your differential diagnosis evaluation. Yeah. Examination, evaluation, differential diagnosis, prognosis, and intervention. If you know all of those, you're peachy. Doing just great. I do really appreciate you guys taking the time to be with me today. I do recognize that you have a busy schedule. Things get crazy. Really, really, really appreciate you guys being here. Please, if you haven't, I do urge you to check out, if you're looking for a review course, check out our live review course. We're starting that on Saturday, and I think you'll really like it. We really crush out content, and we have a lot of fun while we do it. As soon as we log out here today, you'll get an automatic redirect, and you'll be able to see that free lymphatics course. I'm always available for questions if you want to click the contact button on ptfinalexam.com. I'll be happy to answer questions as they come. I really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much for the kind words. It's my pleasure to serve, and I found that after 6 years of doing this, that I hate doing things for, I don't know, I hate busy work. I like just helping people understand, getting the light bulb to come on, and in a very real sense, I try to apply things to your practice as a physical therapist so that when you enter the field day one, you've got about 100 different nuggets of information that you've got tucked away, and you're like, okay, I can face anything because I've learned this, this, this. And I have so many people who tell me that after the course, they feel much, much more prepared to enter the workforce. So I hope you really like it. Jose, when is the lymphatic mini course? As soon as we log out here, as soon as I close up the session, you'll be able to rate this session. I do encourage that you rate the session. You'll be redirected to the page where you can sign up for the free mini course. Yeah, that'll be open for a limited time, so please be sure to check out that as soon as you can. And like I said, we're starting on Saturday, so hope you join us. And let me know if you have any questions. Please feel free to reach out. So thank you guys. Have a fantastic evening, and I will catch you guys later. Thanks. Oh, Will Crane fist pumps all around. Will Crane fist pumps. You'll see that as a part of the course too. Will Crane fist pumps, GTS, GSTQ, Wahoos, and FNL. We've got all sorts of little hashtags that we do as a part of the course. You'll love it. Okay. See you guys later. Peace out. Happy studying.